On a crisp September morning, Calvin Harlow set his mug of black coffee beside the Franklin County Gazette and smiled, until he saw the envelope. The envelope was thick, certified, and too official-looking for something pleasant. Calvin squinted at the bold return address, Oakshire Estates Homeowners Association. That was odd. His farm wasn't in Oakshire. Never had been. He set the envelope down gently on the kitchen table beside the newspaper, then stepped to the stove to turn off the burner beneath his tin kettle. The faint clinking of wind chimes outside his window floated in as he poured the hot water slowly over fresh grounds in his old ceramic dripper. The comforting smell of dark roast filled the small farmhouse kitchen, where decades-old oak cabinets met freshly painted walls. He gave the coffee one stir with a spoon engraved Harlow 72, a wedding gift from Maggie, and let it bloom. Through the screen door, the morning world had taken on that early fall hue he loved. Maple trees at the edge of his porch glowed like lanterns. Somewhere near the pasture, a crow gave its slow commentary on the season. Calvin took his mug and stepped out onto the porch. The chill kissed his arms through his flannel, but he didn't mind. The land stretched out as it always had, fences upright, gravel drive undisturbed, and no HOA signs for miles, at least, none that had ever applied to him. He sat down in the rocking chair Maggie had painted navy blue their first summer on the farm. His eyes scanned the familiar rows of sycamores, and he smiled faintly. The past year had been one of quiet healing. After retiring from the county, he'd poured himself into restoring the old place. The porch railings, the kitchen grout, even the cracked barn door, all fixed with his hands. The work had been honest and slow, just as he needed. A soft knock broke the rhythm of the wind chimes. "Morning, Cal." June Abernathy's voice called from the porch steps. She held a pie tin under one arm and a folder of newspapers in the other. Her gray curls bounced as she walked up, cardigan flapping slightly in the breeze. "You always bring sweets when something's about to be sour," Calvin said, half smiling. June chuckled. "Apple crumble. Still warm. And no, I'm not here to give you trouble. Unless you count the Gazette's crossword, those editors need a dictionary." He accepted the tin with a nod and opened the screen door wider. "Come on in. Just made coffee." Minutes later, they sat at the table, the crumble steaming between them, two mugs clinking lightly. "What's with the envelope?" June asked, gesturing with a piece of forked apple. Calvin passed it over. "HOA notice. From Oakshire." June raised her eyebrows. "But your farm's not in Oakshire." "I know." He opened it slowly, sliding the crisp documents across the table. "They think otherwise." She read silently, eyes narrowing. "Calvin, this talks about driveway encroachment. And compliance orders. That's their language for, pay or we escalate." He nodded, his fingers tapping the table rhythmically. "They must have pulled records from somewhere. But I've lived here 40 years. This land's been Harlow property since 1936. June picked up the enclosed map. "This looks off. The coordinates are modern GIS tags, but they're layered over a general plot. This isn't how official plats are filed." "I thought so too," he said. "But I haven't pulled our actual survey documents in years." June leaned back. "You might want to. Before they decide to get creative. HOAs don't bluff long when they smell leverage." The conversation drifted. June recounted the tale of a couple across town whose shutters had violated some color ordinance, and how Oakshire's enforcement board had insisted on repainting fees. Calvin listened politely, but his mind was already pacing ahead. Later that evening, after June had left and the sun had settled behind the trees, Calvin reheated the last bit of stew and sat alone at the kitchen table. The letter sat under his notepad, beside his half-eaten cornbread. He read it again, this time more slowly. Something about the way the driveway was described bothered him. The phrasing didn't match how plats were written during his tenure. There were strange redundancies in the property ID, and the alleged shared easement seemed tacked on like a patch over a rip. His brow furrowed. He stood up slowly and made his way to the coat closet. He pulled out a battered green tube from the back corner, the kind county surveyors used to store rolled plats, and blew dust off the cap. Let's see if they know what lines they're crossing. The rumble wasn't thunder. It was 10 yellow bulldozers crawling up Calvin's gravel path like mechanical beetles. He sat upright in bed, the low grating hum vibrating through the walls before his feet hit the hardwood floor. By the time he reached the window, a dust cloud was curling along the eastern field. Through the misted pane, Calvin saw them, machines moving in slow, deliberate formation. One by one, they rolled across his drive like a funeral procession of iron. He pulled on his flannel, tugged boots over socks, and stepped out onto the porch, the morning air damp and still. The sky was an overcast gray, heavy with unspoken tension. Dew clung to every leaf, and birds that usually nested along the oak fence scattered in alarm. Down by the gate, a new sign had been staked into the ground, Oakshire Estates Homeowners Association, Compliance Enforcement in Progress. Calvin didn't grab a hat. He didn't lock the door. He just started walking. The bulldozers were parked neatly, their engines idling like beasts waiting for a command. A man in a faded work jacket and hard hat stood with a folder under his arm. He watched Calvin approach and shifted his stance. The gravel crunched under Calvin's steps, deliberate and slow. "You the foreman?" Calvin asked. The man nodded. "Ralph Kinsey. Contracted for containment and grading." "You Calvin Harlow?" "I am. This is my land. What exactly are you planning to contain?" Ralph glanced behind him, then opened the folder. "Work order says property encroachment mitigation. Per Oakshire HOA Code 13B. Boundary enforcement. We're to install a barrier today." Calvin took the folder and flipped through the pages. The map was hastily printed. The lot number was familiar, but the legend was off, and the legend's font too modern. "Did you measure this yourself?" "No, sir. We got this from the HOA Compliance Board." "All cleared, I was told." Ralph hesitated. "We just do the digging." The low rumble of another engine made Calvin turn. A dark SUV rolled up the side path and came to a smooth stop. The passenger door opened with a hiss. Marla Jean Corbin stepped out, hair pinned, blazer pressed, clipboard in hand. Her heels clicked against the gravel as if the stones had agreed to part for her. "Mr. Harlow," she called, offering a smile that had been practiced in front of a mirror. "So glad you're already outside. We were hoping to get started promptly." Calvin didn't smile. "Do you always send 10 bulldozers to greet your neighbors?" Marla's laugh was clipped and airy. "This is a formal compliance action, not a greeting." She extended a thick envelope. "You've received multiple notices. This is the final escalation step, as outlined in Section 14 of the Oakshire Handbook." He didn't take the envelope. "My farm isn't part of Oakshire." "Well, that's where the disagreement lies," she said, letting the envelope hover in the air. "The most recent amendment shows your driveway extends 27 feet into Oakshire's common use easement. That makes it subject to compliance." "I haven't amended anything." Marla clicked her pen and made a note. "Then you're likely unaware of the retroactive land use fees as well. Your balance now totals $4,800 per quarter, dating back 5 years. We're willing to settle for $9,600 if paid within 72 hours. Calvin took the envelope slowly. "This map here," he said, opening the documents and pulling out a printed plat copy. "It's based on an amended survey?" "Yes," Marla said with manufactured patience. "One submitted in 2019 and affirmed by the Franklin County Survey Office." He studied the map closely. His eyes didn't scan, they dissected. The drawing was layered over a digital overlay. The property line shimmered in blue, with a slashed red segment cutting through his driveway. It was neatly labeled Boundary Adjustment 2019A. At the bottom corner sat a signature. A name he knew intimately. "Did you say this was filed in 2019? Marla gave a crisp nod. "Affirmed. Stamped. Recorded." Calvin stared at the signature again. Harlow, JC, but something was wrong. The flourish on the Y in County Surveyor curled upward like a fishhook. He lowered the document and looked Marla straight in the eye. "That's not mine," he said calmly. "That Y curls the wrong way." Marla blinked. For a moment, the veneer cracked, but then she recovered. "Well, I can assure you it was authenticated. If you'd like to contest the fees, we can provide a standard objection form. However, per enforcement policy, the equipment will proceed with installation unless payment or legal action halts us." From behind her, two men in black jackets stepped from the SUV. Vin and Clint, their names stitched in gold over Oakshire HOA logos. Their arms were crossed, and their faces blank. Calvin looked at Ralph, who stood awkwardly with one boot half buried in the mud. "You comfortable with this, Mr. Kinsey?" Ralph shifted. "Just doing what we're paid for." Calvin nodded slowly, turning back to Marla. Her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing that something wasn't going according to her script. She stepped closer, her voice syrupy. "You've got till Friday to comply, Mr. Harlow. Or we close it for good. There's nothing like pie to pull neighbors together, or expose a fraud that could crumble a whole neighborhood." Betty's Diner was the kind of place where rumors moved faster than refills. The chalkboard outside still boasted "Tuesday Special," meatloaf and 2 spoons of truth, and the bell above the door rang like a town crier when Calvin stepped in. June was already seated at the corner booth, a glass pie dish resting beside her handbag like a family heirloom. She waved him over. "You're late. Thought you got buried under bulldozers." "Would have been quieter," Calvin muttered, sliding into the seat. The smell of fried potatoes and fresh coffee curled around him like an old coat. He glanced at the pie. Apple. Lattice top. A small sticker still clung to the side of the dish, County Champion, 1998. June poured them each a cup from the tabletop thermos. "Heard about your visitors. 10 machines. That's not a compliance warning, it's a siege." Calvin stirred in a sugar cube. "They handed me a plat amendment dated 2019. Said it was from the county office. Claimed I crossed into their common use easement." June blinked. "You're kidding. That driveway's older than color television." He nodded. "But the signature was wrong. Someone mimicked my old signing style. Got the name mostly right. But not the Y." Her spoon froze midair. "You're saying they forged county land records?" "I'm saying," Calvin said slowly, "we need to look." They left the diner before the lunch crowd rolled in, June carrying the now sliced pie in a foil-covered pan. The wind was picking up, rustling yellow leaves down Main Street. At the Franklin County Records office, Eldon Hayes was hunched over a microfilm reader, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose like always. "Cal?" Eldon looked up, squinting through the late daylight. "Haven't seen you down here since the snowstorm in 19. I need to dig through some plat amendments from the last 5 years." Eldon scratched his beard. "Still chasing lines?" "Someone's trying to move mine." They set up in the back room, old plat drawers creaking open like the spines of forgotten books. June pulled up a stool while Eldon loaded film reels and cross-referenced file numbers. Calvin sifted through archived blueprints like a man peeling back memory. 2 hours passed, marked by the faint whir of the microfilm machine and the occasional creak of the furnace. At last, Eldon tapped a paper with his knuckle. "Here. Amendment 2019A. See that stamp?" Calvin leaned in. "Format's outdated. That layout style stopped after 2016. No way the county approved this with that header." Eldon frowned. "Signature block claims it was filed in March. But look, page footer references parcel divisions that didn't exist until late 2020. Calvin nodded. "Fabricated. Sloppy." June raised an eyebrow. "And dangerous." From her purse, she pulled a glossy printout, one of those HOA gala snapshots where everyone looks overdressed and oversmiled. Guess who was cozying up to Westland Ventures at last fall's fundraiser? Calvin took the photo. There was Marla Jean Corbin, shaking hands with a man in a pinstripe suit and a Westland name tag. Developers don't show up to HOA charity nights unless they're getting something in return. Land, June said. Cheap. Cleaned. Cleared. They reconvened at Calvin's barn. Upstairs, in the loft that still smelled faintly of linseed oil and dry hay, he unrolled a series of historic maps onto a wide drafting table. His grandfather's notations, faded in blue pencil, still lined the margins like whispers from the past. He laid a satellite overlay atop them, translucent and modern. Roads, rooftops, driveways, each lit with digital clarity. Then he aligned the current Oakshire plat, adjusting the corners with metal rulers, weighing them down with an old wrench and a jar of fence nails. The layers didn't line up. Look at this, Calvin said, pointing. The HOA clubhouse, their tennis courts, even Corbin's own house, sitting 20 feet onto land that belongs to the Harlow Family Trust. June's lips parted, but no sound came. Then she let out a low whistle. No wonder they're in a hurry to block you out. Behind them, the barn's stairs creaked. Judge Ruth Denning emerged, scarf knotted neatly at her throat, glasses gleaming beneath the dusty lights. Eldon called me, she said. Said you had a plat puzzle that smelled funny. Calvin gestured her over. Ruth studied the maps silently, running a finger along the faded pencil boundary. Then she looked up at the overlay, eyes narrowing. I think they just bulldozed onto the wrong man's land, she muttered. Calvin didn't need a lawyer. He had something better, decades of land records and a barn full of the truth. The loft smelled of turpentine and thyme. Long wooden drawers groaned as Calvin slid them open, revealing topo maps from the 1970s, acetate overlays, and plat sheets yellowed like old letters. Dust floated lazily in the shafts of late afternoon light cutting through the barn's upper windows. The air was cool but not cold, and the quiet hum of the old slide projector added a steady rhythm to the room, like a distant heartbeat. Judge Ruth sat at the far end of the drafting table, her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. Calvin unfurled another county survey, laid it next to the latest GIS printout, and adjusted both with his monogrammed ruler from 1983, gifted the day he was appointed county land commissioner. His movements were slow, methodical. The kind of care born of knowing every inch mattered. June was pacing, holding a stack of HOA newsletters with post-it tabs sprouting like wildflowers. 4 years ago, she said, the HOA started quietly warning residents not to speak to outsiders about boundary inquiries. Called it preserving community value. They knew something was fishy back then. Calvin tapped the ruler against the corner of the map. They knew it was more than fishy. They knew it was theft. Eldon arrived balancing a cardboard archive box. Found the permit, he said, breathless. Filed under Westland Holdings, LLC. That's Marla's husband's outfit, I'm pretty sure. But here's the kicker, it was misfiled under variance appeals. Like they didn't want it found. He set it down with a thump and pointed to the cover sheet. Development application. March 2019. Stamped. But look at the notary. Judge Ruth leaned forward, squinting. That's not our seal. That's a photocopy of a seal, and it's outdated. They haven't used this design since 15. And the signature? Doesn't match the notary register. Forged? June asked. Ruth nodded. Sloppy, but just enough to fool the untrained. Calvin adjusted the slide projector, lining up an aerial image taken the year before. It showed the Oakshire Estates development from above, crisp rooftops and winding cul-de-sacs, but when he layered the image over the original plat, the mismatch became glaring. The clubhouse was off by nearly 20 feet. The community garden, Marla's office, even the HOA pool, all extended well into what had once been labeled Harlow Trust, Parcel B. He didn't say anything for a while. Just stared. You sure? Eldon asked quietly. Positive. That marker by the creek? I placed that with my own hands in 1987. And this line, he traced it with the tip of his ruler, runs eastward. Always has. The barn seemed to fall silent, save for the click of June's pen. "I found something else," she said finally. She handed Calvin a photo clipped from a gala program. Marla, dressed in deep burgundy, stood between her husband and a tall man in a tailored gray suit with a Westland Holdings lapel pin. They were all smiling, wine glasses raised, a banner behind them reading Franklin Growth Initiative. Calvin stared at the image, then slowly slid it into a folder labeled Evidence A. Judge Ruth stood and walked to the window, her hands clasped behind her back. "If 15% of that neighborhood is on your trust land, and they tried to push you off yours to bury it, this isn't code enforcement. It's land laundering. Could be criminal," Eldon added. "Especially with falsified stamps and misfiled permits." Calvin exhaled. Not angry, just anchored. "I'm not out for blood," he said. "But I won't let them pave over this farm." June moved beside him, leaning over the maps. Her voice was quiet but steady. "It's not about the driveway, Cal. They're after your whole farm. 4-0. Sometimes the clearest line between right and wrong comes from the man holding the fire hose." The firehouse kitchen smelled like chili and floor wax. A pot simmered on the stove, its red-orange surface glinting under a fluorescent bulb that flickered whenever the wind shifted. The calendar on the fridge still read August, its image of a Dalmatian perched beside an old ladder truck faded from too many sunny windows. From a wall-mounted radio, a mellow Fleetwood Mac tune played softly, blending with the occasional crackle of the fire band. Calvin sat at the scarred kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug bearing the outline of a bald eagle and the words Franklin County Fire and Rescue. Across from him, Daniel Corbin leaned back, one leg jittering under the table. "Appreciate the coffee," Daniel said, though he hadn't taken more than a sip. "Appreciate the surprise inspection," Calvin replied, setting his mug down with care. Daniel managed a rueful smile. "Yeah. Chief says routine fire code check. Probably thinks I'll catch you storing turpentine in the rafters or stacking hay near open outlets." "Used to do both," Calvin said. "But not lately." A beat of silence passed. Outside, a maple leaf skittered across the concrete apron of the engine bay. "I saw the bulldozers," Daniel said finally. "Didn't feel right." Calvin nodded but didn't speak. "My mom's, well, she's determined. Has been my whole life. When she says something's going to happen, it usually does. HOA meetings, land use projects, committee votes, she keeps folders on everything." "I've seen some of her paperwork," Calvin said. Daniel looked down. Westland's breathing down her neck. "I didn't know until last week, but she mortgaged our house. Said it was an investment, front money for infrastructure bonds. She's got big plans." Calvin stirred his coffee. "Does she know they built over the trust line?" "She suspects. I overheard her arguing with someone on speakerphone. Mentioned boundary leverage and clearing the old man off while it's quiet. That was before the bulldozers showed up." The chili pot bubbled behind them, its aroma cutting through the silence. Calvin got up and stirred it once, just to have something to do with his hands. "She's not evil," Daniel said quietly. "But she's desperate. Always said our family lost too much time in the middle-class mush. This project, Oakshire expansion, the development, this is her shot at legacy." "That legacy sits on other people's porches," Calvin replied gently. Daniel looked up, eyes shadowed. "I know." Footsteps echoed down the hall. June appeared, wind-blown and brisk, her coat flecked with leaves. "Hope I'm not crashing lunch." "Never," Calvin said. "There's plenty of chili." She pulled out a folded envelope and handed it to Daniel. "Got these in my mailbox. No return address. Anonymous tipster, maybe. Internal HOA emails, dates, board notes. Mentions of quiet pressure campaigns and compliance reshuffles. And your mother's name. A lot." Daniel scanned the first page, his jaw tightening. Most of the board has no idea what's going on. They follow her lead, sign where she says, don't ask questions. But a few, Barbara Winters, Tom Givens, have doubts. I can talk to them. Calvin raised an eyebrow. You'd do that? Daniel nodded. Off the record, quietly. There's a town council session next week. If we can bring residents in, let them see the real lines, the maps, everything, we can turn this. June took a mug from the cupboard and filled it. You sure you're ready to be the match in your own house's fuse box? Daniel took a long sip from his eagle mug, then set it down with a soft clink. I'm not doing this to bring her down. I'm doing it so she doesn't bring everyone else down with her. The three sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the radio filling the space. Calvin watched Daniel for a long time, measuring the young man not by his name but by his weight in the room. He spoke quietly. You may be her son, but you've got your own line to hold. You could smell tension in the air, right between the percolator and the folding chairs. The Oakshire Community Center still looked like a school gym if you squinted, basketball hoops chained up near the ceiling, faded tape lines on the wood floor, and a set of alphabet posters hanging crookedly above the bleachers. But tonight, it was a town hall. Rows of metal chairs creaked under the weight of curiosity, concern, and something more volatile. The tang of percolated coffee and too much deodorant clung to the air. Calvin sat in the second row, behind a table holding a borrowed slide projector, a battered laptop, and a manila folder labeled Harlow Trust, Boundary Review. He adjusted his collar and glanced around. A few dozen neighbors had already gathered, some in golf windbreakers, others in weekend denim. At the back wall, a sheriff's deputy leaned with folded arms, his gaze easy but watchful. Next to him, a table offered coffee in a thermos labeled Oakshire Book Club and a tray of grocery store cookies. Judge Ruth sat to Calvin's left, her hands folded in her lap, expression unreadable. June hovered near the entrance, handing out printed flyers, a side-by-side comparison of the original property plat and the current HOA development overlay. She greeted each person with a polite nod and the occasional one-liner. You'll want to read the fine print on your lawn. The lights flickered once, twice, before settling. Daniel stepped up to the front, cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. The speakers popped. A hush fell across the crowd. Thank you all for coming, he began. This is an informal gathering, but we thought the community deserved some clarity. A few people shifted. One man raised his phone as if to record. Daniel continued. I invited someone tonight who has questions, big ones, about how our neighborhood has been managed. I think we owe it to ourselves to listen. He nodded toward Calvin, who stood slowly and walked to the center of the floor. The projector cast a pale light behind him, cutting across the gym like a slide of truth. I'm Calvin Harlow, he said. My family's lived on the property bordering Oakshire since before the interstate came through. Some of you know me. Some don't. But I've got something to share, something I think you'll want to hear. He clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, a black and white map of the county from 1982. This is the original survey showing the Harlow Trust land, filed, notarized, and recorded. Here's the line marking the east boundary. My driveway's inside it. Always has been. Next slide, a 2019 plat marked Amendment A. Calvin let the image hang there a moment. This was submitted by the Oakshire HOA to claim my driveway crosses their common easement. But the notary stamp? Forged. The file format? Outdated. This never went through proper channels. Murmurs began to ripple through the seats. I've compared satellite overlays, GIS data, and historic plats. With help from former officials and a retired judge, he nodded toward Ruth. What we found was more than a mistake. We found a boundary shift. Gasps broke as the next slide appeared, an aerial photo, two colored outlines overlaid. The blue represented the HOA footprint. The red traced the Harlow Trust line. They overlapped in all the wrong places. That's the clubhouse, Calvin said, pointing. That's the HOA office. And that's about 15% of your neighborhood, built over land the HOA doesn't own. Mrs. Tillman, seated 3 rows back, rose to her feet. I got a letter in 2021, she said. Said if I didn't repaint my door, I'd be fined weekly. I called to ask questions, and a man from the HOA's lawyer's office told me, her voice faltered, that silence would protect my home. Others looked at her. A few nodded. Mr. Duval, an elderly man near the wall, cleared his throat. I always wondered why the survey copy I got in escrow had a missing page. Eldon Hayes stepped forward from the side of the room. He held up a small folder and said simply, "My name's Eldon. I used to be deputy clerk. And I can confirm that several documents filed between 2018 and 2020 under the HOA's name are not in our official record. And the ones that are, they don't match the signature log." A low hum swept through the room, voices rising in pitch and disbelief. The lights flickered again. Calvin clicked to the last slide. "I'm not here to throw stones," he said. "But I am here to say, your homes are built on truth, or they're not. And truth has a funny way of standing still while everything else moves." From the back, June moved down the aisle, handing out flyers one by one. Some residents took them with trembling fingers. Then Daniel returned to the front. His face was pale, but his voice carried. "My mom lied to you. And she's not done yet." They thought Calvin would fold. Instead, he rolled out the map and turned the room upside down. The HOA clubhouse hadn't seen this many folding chairs since the 4th of July potluck. Every seat was filled, residents, reporters, city officials, elbows pressed close, faces tight with anticipation. The media camera lights flickered against the pale wood paneling, and cell phones glinted in nearly every hand. At the back, 2 tripods held live-streaming rigs. Somewhere near the front, a nervous cough broke the silence. November had brought cold with it. The kind that sat in your bones. Even the room, overwarm from too many bodies, couldn't quite shake the weight in the air. The sheriff stood near the exit doors, arms folded, badge gleaming. Caroline McKee, the county attorney, adjusted her glasses beside him. Judge Ruth sat 2 rows back, legs crossed, expression unreadable. Daniel paced behind the side curtain, waiting. At the front of the hall, Calvin stepped to the table. He looked older under the harsh ceiling lights, lines around his eyes deeper than usual, but his voice was calm when it came. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know this wasn't how most of you planned to spend your Thursday evening. But some truths don't wait for convenience." He reached into a flat document box and pulled out a long, laminated sheet. Then another. And another. One by one, he laid them across the front table, weighting the corners with rubber stamps and bound legal volumes. "This is the original 1982 plat of the Harlow Trust land. Recorded. Notarized. Stamped. Here's the overlay from 2001, showing parcel divisions after the bypass was built. And this," he paused to lay down the final sheet, translucent with bold red markings, "this is Oakshire Estates' claimed boundary adjustment from 2019. The red lines cut directly into the Harlow land. The problem," Calvin continued, "isn't just that they're wrong. It's that this document was submitted with my signature. Except I never signed it." Murmurs started in the back, spreading like brushfire. Calvin stepped aside as Caroline approached the podium. "Franklin County has reviewed the documents in question," she said, voice clear and even. "The 2019 plat amendment was filed under Marla Jean Corbin's HOA board. Our forensic team has concluded that the surveyor's signature is a forgery. Additionally, the notary stamp used is no longer valid and was never issued for that year." Gasps rippled through the room. Marla, seated 3 chairs to the right of the dais, stood abruptly. "This is a personal attack. Mr. Harlow he's twisting facts to stir up resentment. The HOA acted with full legal authority." Sheriff Granger raised a hand. "You'll have your turn, ma'am." But Calvin didn't respond to her. He turned toward the crowd and nodded to Daniel. The young fireman stepped forward, posture stiff. He cleared his throat and looked out at neighbors he'd known his whole life. "My name is Daniel Corbin. I work at Franklin Fire and Rescue. I'm also Marla Corbin's son." I've lived under her roof. Worked with her on HOA events. And I can say, under oath, that she pressured multiple board members to pass amendments without review. I saw emails discussing how to clear Mr. Harlow's land quietly. She called it an overdue course correction. He looked down. She knew what she was doing. Marla stood again. Her voice cracked. That's enough, Daniel. You don't understand the pressures I've faced. Judge Ruth rose slowly. And yet, she said, you chose to falsify public records. That's not pressure, Miss Corbin. That's fraud. Calvin walked to the last easel, flipping it to reveal a large aerial photograph. A red outline marked the original trust land. A blue overlay showed Oakshire's current footprint. The audience leaned forward. 15% of this development, your gardens, your clubhouse, even your HOA president's home, was built on land my family never sold, Calvin said. There's no deed. No lease. No legal transfer. Phones rose into the air as residents filmed the map. Barbara Winters, longtime board member, stepped back from the table quietly. Her eyes shimmered. Marla gripped the podium. This is slander. It's a vendetta. I built this community. But not on your land, Calvin replied, voice still soft. The lights flickered overhead, buzzing like a wire under strain. Sheriff Granger stepped forward, hand resting near his belt. Miss Corbin, he said, not unkindly, I'll need you to come with me. This isn't just civil, it's criminal now. They came for a driveway. They left with a community. The autumn air smelled of cinnamon and damp leaves. At the edge of the Harlow farm, where bulldozers had once lined up like armored threats, folding tables now stood draped in plaid cloth, topped with pies, mason jars of sunflowers, and crockpots steaming with stew. Kids darted between hay bales and picnic blankets, their laughter rising above the gentle strum of a folk band tucked under the old oak tree. A sign near the barn read, Franklin County Fall Festival, hosted by neighbors. Calvin stood beside a row of newly planted roses, his hands dusted with soil. Around him, neighbors worked in pairs, hoeing, watering, chatting. What had once been a battleground was now a blooming stretch of cabbage, asters, and thyme. They're taking root, June said, approaching with 2 plastic cups of lemonade. Just like you. He smiled, accepting the cup. The breeze ruffled the collar of his flannel. Funny thing, he said. I thought I was planting vegetables. Turns out it was trust. A week had passed since the emergency HOA hearing. Marla Jean Corbin now faced 3 felony charges: falsification of county records, unlawful coercion, and abuse of authority. Her resignation had been accepted without ceremony, and Barbara Winters had stepped in as interim president with a unanimous vote. But there had been no cheering, no triumph in Marla's fall, just a quiet relief, like a fever breaking. Instead of lawsuits, Calvin had offered something radical: peace. For a symbolic fee of $1, each homeowner whose property touched the disputed boundary could formally and legally obtain the land title they'd assumed was theirs. No liens. No drawn-out litigation. Just a handshake, a signature, and a potluck to follow. Judge Ruth called it restorative justice. Eldon called it darn neighborly. Calvin called it necessary. Now the disputed acreage had been turned into the Oakshire Harlow Community Garden. Raised beds, compost barrels, and painted signs dotted the field. Children knelt beside older residents, planting carrots, trimming hedges, or just playing tag around the scarecrow. At one end of the garden, Mark Ruffalo, his cane leaning on a trellis, knelt beside a row of rosebushes. His hands moved with the care of a surgeon, guiding young volunteers in the delicate art of grafting. You don't force the stem, he told them. You invite it. On the small wooden stage, Daniel Corbin stood awkwardly beside a banner that read Franklin County Youth Leadership Awards. His new fire department uniform was crisp, and the badge on his chest gleamed in the sun. When his name was announced as the department's new community liaison, the applause was long and genuine. Later, Judge Ruth made her way to the microphone, glasses perched like always on the bridge of her nose. Somewhere along the way, she said, this county forgot what boundaries were for. Not to divide, but to define. Not to exclude, but to protect. That changes now. She turned to Calvin. And it starts with you. From the front row, Eldon raised a hand. All in favor of appointing Calvin Harlow to chair the County Land Ethics Committee? The response wasn't a vote. It was a cheer. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Calvin and Daniel carried a wooden sign across the lawn. Together, they planted it beside the new gate where the bulldozers had once blocked the road. Community garden, welcome all. The crowd erupted into applause. June nudged Calvin, her tone light but fond. Still think retirement was going to be boring? He chuckled, raising his cup to hers in a soft clink. Wasn't expecting this much dirt under my nails. The band struck up a final tune, something bluegrass and hopeful. Beneath the old oak, families danced, neighbors hugged, and a boy ran through the garden holding a kite made from stitched-together flyers that once warned of non-compliance. The lines had been redrawn, not on maps, but in hearts. And this time, they were meant to grow.